Namaste and welcome to Live, Love, Engage. I am Gloria Grace Rand, and today we're going to be talking a bit about the author's life and about family. And we're going to be doing that with our guest today on the program. His name is David Duratzi. And he is, well, I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a second, but first off, I want to welcome you to Live, Love, Engage.
Thank you.
We appreciate having you here. So let me
Great to be here.
let our audience know a little bit more about you. He's a successful salesman and a California native living in the Los Angeles area. But what's he's really all about, I think, right at the moment, certainly, is that he has published a new book, and it's called The In-Between Artist, the story of Tony Duratzi, and it is a candid reflection on his father's life, drawn from journals and scrapbooks dating from the early 1920s and beyond. And so I thought we would start right there with my question of what prompted you to decide to write a book about your dad?
Well, Gloria, what really prompted me was my mom about 12 years ago. She passed away about 10 years ago. We were looking in her garage and she had, I'd say, 20, 30 boxes of notes and scrapbooks from my father, who was a celebrity, like you said, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And it was all his notes that he wrote. And she says, you might want to do something with these someday. Your dad wrote this, all these notes about his whole life. And he was kind of a mysterious guy. I wasn't with him that much, other than I talk about it in the book with his artwork and stuff. But I learned some stuff even when I wrote the book that I never even knew. So I really got to know my dad. My dad was he was just an amazing guy, trying to be number one on radio when radio first came out. Then it was TV. And it was amazing what he did. And he started all back in his art. His art started when he was a little kid. He was the oldest of 11 children. And so my mom's wish came true. And I feel very fulfilled to do it. And it's just, I got it published and who knows where it's going to go. It's really a great story. And I think a lot of people could learn from it.
Well, tell us a little bit more about him. What was there anything? Well, number one, when you mentioned that he was an artist, so tell us a little bit about that. What did he do?
Okay, yeah, he was. My dad was like 4 years old, and he was the oldest of 11 children. And my grandfather had a bar back in. We had a bar, hotel, and a market. He raised 11 kids back in Missoula, Montana, and he saw his talent. He copied something right on the wall. And he actually wrote at 4 years old and he showed it to everybody there. And they says, oh my gosh. And from that day forward, my dad wrote that his dad knew that he had this art talent. So he went so when he turned 18, he asked my dad, he says, where do you want to go to school? He says, I want to go to the number one art school in America. So he sent him to the Art Institute in New York, which at that time was the number one. So he was compared there to Michelangelo by his drawings, by his peers and his teachers. And he went there for the first year. He was excelled in everything. And he was the youngest guy to ever be on the board of directors for the school. And then he had a traumatic experience when he went. Then his second year, he was going back to school, and he had a traumatic experience where he had had a situation where he had his first nervous breakdown. And he was, it was kind of, make a long story short, he woke up, in the middle of a hotel room. Somebody gave him a couple of drinks, and evidently they laced the drinks, and he woke up naked in a room, and he didn't know what was going on the next day. And he actually, that's when he admitted to Bellevue Hospital in New York. He called his dad. His dad came there, and they diagnosed him with, bipolar manic depressive. He had a nervous breakdown. And so the dad came and got him. He took him back to home. And his uncle happened to be a psychologist at the time. And his dad So the family loved and cared for him and brought him
Mm,
back.
mm,
So it took 6 months to really come back. And he never went back to the Art Students League in New York. But after 6 months of recovering, he was teaching night school in the high school, teaching art. And then he ended up finishing his art degree at University of Montana in Missoula.
mm,
And when he was there, his sister passed away. She was only like, I mean, she was second youngest to him. She got
mm.
pneumonia for a week and passed away. And that was traumatic after
Oh
my
my
dad
goodness.
was getting
Yeah.
better. So he was inspired to do a drawing of her and the creation of man while he was home, because he just was really good at his art. And he decided he wanted to, he heard about the World's Fair in Chicago,
Oh.
and he was able to get to Chicago, and he was walking down the walkway and, walking down the show like at a
Mm-hmm.
convention center where it was the number one. They hadn't had a World's Fair in 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And two Catholic priests saw him and says, "What do you got there?" And he pulled out these drawings, and they say, "Oh my gosh, are you going to enter those drawings?" Because one was, the death of Helena showed, Christ taking her up to heaven with the keys. And
Mm.
anyway, they said, "That's an amazing drawing." Make a long story short, they said, "Why aren't you going to enter?" He said, "I don't have any money." So they said, "Well, how much is it going to take?" They said, it's $10 for each drawing. So
Mm.
they gave him the $20 to enter, which is about $200 today. And he won
Wow.
first place in both categories he
Oh,
entered.
oh my goodness.
So 22-year-old, he was 22, 23 years old, and the whole city of Chicago knew who he was.
Mm.
And he was able from there radio came out, and his dream was always to teach kids how to draw on the radio.
Yeah.
And TV wasn't out at the time.
Right, right.
So my dad he was always, thinking ahead, and he walked into a radio station and he showed him, he says, "Look, I want to do this." And they say, "You're out of your mind. How are you
I
going
know,
to do that on
yeah.
the radio?"
Right.
And, and so he goes in there, and the program director said, "Yeah, let's do this." Anyway, for 2 years in Chicago after that World's Fair incident, he was the number one radio show across the Midwest. But
Oh.
Tony O'Dare, first cartoonist of the year, Tony DeRazzi, that's his real name.
Ah.
And so, but he had an incident when he was in Chicago. He had a fiance. He met this girl, and it was kind of ironic. She looked like my mom, and he broke up with her, and she committed suicide.
Oh.
So he was really set back,
Mm.
and he says, "I got to get out of this. I can't deal with this."
Yeah.
So he looked in the paper, and he saw this article that Walt Disney was looking for in-between artists in Hollywood. And he
Mm.
says, he says, I would fit that, because it's the in-between artist is the one that takes one cell frame to another. This is before computers, where
Right.
they have 7 or 10 pages where you flip through them. And so you see the
Mm-hmm.
motion. So it's smooth from one motion to the
Yeah.
next. So he takes the train to California, Hollywood. He gets there and he goes to Disney, and he finds out that there are 1,000 applicants for this job
Mm.
as an in-between artist. And he gets there and he applies, and lo and behold, he gets the job. And they gave him a trial period for $10 a week. And it was to be the first cartoonist for the big Disney first 80-minute animated film called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Oh, wow.
And so he was on top of the world. So after 30 days, they picked him. He was their cartoonist for Snow White. And he actually had a lot to do with the development of Dopey, the character,
Mm-hmm.
in the actual movie. And that went on to be the number one money-making film for Disney of all time.
Yeah.
So what's kind of interesting is my dad, when going through all this, and he was at Disney, he was doing real well, excited.
Mm-hmm.
But he walked through, he was living at the YMCA, and that's where he used to live in Hollywood there.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw that KHJ Radio, which was one of the top 4 at that time in America, KHJ, NBC, CBS.
Mm.
And he says, "Wow, what I want to do, I want to teach kids on one of these big stations that
Yeah.
is national." So anyway, he tried for 3 weeks straight. He writes in his writing.
Mm-hmm.
And the lady at the front, which we know today, like I've been in sales for you, you know how it is. You try to get in a place.
Yeah.
their guard dog. This lady
The
would
gate.
not let him in at the
That's right.
gate.
The
Yeah,
gatekeeper.
the gatekeeper. And so he was about ready to give up. He wrote in the story, and he says he was coming down the elevator, and this bearded gentleman says, "Hey, Sonny," he says, "what's going on? You look really," now remember, he was 23 years old. "You
Mm,
look pretty dejected." He says, "Why are you so upset?" He says, "Well, I've been trying to talk to the program director for going on 3 weeks now, and I can't see him. He says, I need an appointment." He says, "Well, that's too bad." He says, he says, "maybe I could do something about that." He says, "You come back on Monday." This was a Friday. And he says, "You come back on Monday and tell him you have an appointment with Bill Goodwin and the program director." And he didn't, anyway, make a long story short, he showed up. He was worried because he didn't make the back at Disney that day.
mm.
And all of a sudden he gets back and he goes there at 10 o'clock for his interview on Monday. And there's Bill Goodwin. And Bill Goodwin he got to be a big TV star later in life. He was Frank Sinatra's comedian on his show. He helped produce his show. Gracie and Allen, he was a producer. And so, make a long story short, he showed him. He says, he got right to the point. He said, "Tony," he said, "what do you got?" He says, "how are you going to do this?" He says, he says, "I'm going to do this. I'm going to show kids how to draw." And he
Mhm.
says, so Bill Goodwin says, "That's great. Can you have a show Saturday?" He says, without thinking much, my dad says, and I'm kind of like that too, as if I have an opportunity.
Yeah.
He said, "Yeah, I can." So he had to walk back to Disney that day. And the guy was upset because it was late. This
Yeah.
guy was Don Graham. He'd worked with Art Babbitt. I mean, they were one of the original cartoonists of all time for Disney. And he
Mm-hmm.
says, "Well, hey, Tony, he says, where were you?" I said, I'm doing a radio show." He says, "Wait a minute, you can't do a radio show and work for Disney." He says, "You got to make your mind up right now."
Mm. Oh
So
boy.
anyway, my dad says, "Well, I'm going to go have my own radio show on KHJ." So he did that for a year, ended up, it was a #1 rated show. They had it. And then all of a sudden the war, I think the war came, or there was the Depression,
Yeah.
and it was, I think, the end of the war. And he decided to get married. He met my mom, and they did vaudeville for a year across the United States.
Oh
In
my
the years
goodness.
of Frank Sinatra and stuff, they
Yeah.
did 38 states. And he did cartooning, like he'd take letters, kind of like if people know Tom Hatton, and do and he'd make things out of it. And then he combined his singing with that.
Mm.
So then I guess things got, bad at that time. It was in 1939. He was doing vaudeville. My mom got pregnant, my oldest brother, and he decided to go back to Montana and raise the kids and find a job. But a couple of years later, he got tired of it. He wanted to get back in show business.
Mm.
So he saw an article when he was living in Montana, which is about 100 miles east of Spokane. They needed an advertising manager for KPFJ. And he said he wanted to do that. So he said, maybe if he did that, he can have his own radio show. So he applied. He got the job. He sold tires part-time when he was doing that. And he did end up getting his radio show. So he's a big hit in Spokane for about a year. Then all of a sudden, he got the itch. They bought a home there and everything. He heard about Hollywood TV. And he says, "Oh my gosh." So then my dad went to Hollywood, got his own TV show for 5 years. It was a top kids show on KTLA. And I actually have a photograph of him that I posted, I don't know, that with the original crew of KTLA. And so for 5 years, he had a great show. But then we moved back to LA. And in 1956, at the age of 47, he got in a terrible car accident.
Mm.
And he lost his memory for 6 months.
Oh my.
And I actually remembered I was 6 years old, and I saw him take my dad away in a straitjacket. It
Oh.
got so bad. He lost his memory.
Mm.
He had a breakdown.
Mm.
So he got put away for 6 months in the Camarillo State Hospital. And he actually, he didn't know us. I remember I visited him once. It was quite an experience. But at first I didn't know what had happened. I knew I'd be okay because I was with my mom.
Yeah.
And basically he got out, and he actually, it was hard because he was totally depressed on meds, and he had 37 shock treatments when he was in there. Kind of like the
Oh,
movie
yeah.
Beautiful, was it Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of like same thing. And that must have been terrible on him, but he'd come home, sleep for 12 hours. Then he would start gradually coming back.
Hmm.
And he actually ended up getting into car sales, and he started selling like crazy. I mean, he just, at the time in 50s, the cars were
Yeah.
just selling like crazy.
Yeah.
And this dealer took care of him. And then he went to art school. He taught art at night. And then in his latter part of his life, he always wanted to go to Italy and see Michelangelo's work. And
Hmm.
he tried to do that like 2 or 3 times. And 2 times he had a breakdown again. He came
Hmm.
home, and I actually sat there, and I had to sit with my dad. The traumatic thing was I had to sit there with my dad, and he'd look at me. I was 14 years old. He said, David, he says, what should I do? Should I go in this hospital? Because my mom would always put me to be the rock. She called me the rock of the family, and
Hmm.
she would send me off with him. I said, Dad, you got to do it. So that happened a couple times in his life. And then at the end of his life, he actually, towards the end, he got better. And then he got into TV again. He was a
Hmm.
part-time actor for Dean Martin, for All in the Family, Sanford and Sons.
Wow.
And he managed to get back in. And it was like, but he finally did in his lifetime. He got back to Italy when he was 64 years old,
Oh.
and he heard he had a spot on his lung. And it's interesting the way things happen in life. And the
Hmm.
doctor says, well, we could operate now or we could wait a while. He said, Doctor, I want to go to Italy. And so he made the trip to Italy. He had a breakdown when he was in Italy. What's amazing is my cousin was over there, a student at the time, and she was able to find him and get him back to America. And he
Hmm.
came back, and he had he came back, he had the surgery. And basically I saw him, told him I loved him before he passed. But he survived the surgery with the way he removed the lung, but he had a blood clot and passed away. So
Goodness.
as you could see, he had an amazing, the guy, and he wrote it all down, and it was like a treasure that I found. It
Wow.
was like, it was just amazing. And I
Yeah.
just, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say is that, I mean, despite all of the traumatic things that happened to him and despite all the breakdowns, I mean, he was a fighter. He just
Oh,
never gave up.
he never
And
did.
and that
Yeah.
is, and so I'm sure this book is will be inspiring for a lot of people to know that he just kept at it. He had a dream and he kept going.
I think so. And if nothing else, I think hopefully it'll be a movie someday, and it's very inspirational if you read it, for families that have mental illness within the families,
Hmm.
within their family, immediate or otherwise.
Yeah.
It's a feel good story that I think I've always considered that it's like manic depressive people or mentally ill people are borderline genius.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
he loved to write. And I've actually loved to write. I've been writing for years too about my
Hmm.
life, but this time I'm doing his life. The
Yeah.
next story is going to be my sister, who was a Happy Days star on Happy Days. She was a
Oh,
co-star on the original Happy Days cover of TV Guide. She took my dad's name, Kathy O'Dare.
yeah.
And what's interesting, I was my caretaker for my father, in my teen years growing up. And
Hmm.
then as I got older, I became a caretaker for my sister. She started having mental breakdowns.
Mm.
And it was kind of interesting, that the TV business sometimes is difficult, and you hear a lot of child. I mean, you imagine she was 16 years old on a cover of TV Guide.
Yeah.
So I've learned a lot, and it's taught me to be stronger. And I think if people see it, they'll realize that there's a lot of talent there in people. And if they just take the time and nourish what they see and love them, I think it could
Mhm.
make a big difference.
Absolutely. What was there anything really that stood out that surprised you when you were going through all of his papers that maybe you weren't totally aware
Huh, yeah, I guess at the end, I mean,
of?
what's interesting one thing that just blew me away, I never figured out when I was like 16, my dad called up and he said, David, he says, come over and bring me some fresh clothes. Uh, I just I'm at the real estate office here, and he did real estate part-time, and I never knew why he called me, and I never asked him. And what it was, he was going to go over to a lady's house, and he was going to paint. He was going to do a drawing of her, because she was a beautiful woman,
Uh-huh.
and he was going to do this at her house, and it was like at 9 o'clock at night, and there was no lights where he was at, and he fell into the pool with all his art stuff.
Oh, oh, shoot. Oh, no.
And he writes about it. He said to himself, he says, "Oh my gosh," he says, "I'm sinking." But oh no, but what about all my art stuff? So a kid came running out and says, "Hey, can you need help?" He says, "Well, the help I need to get all my art stuff." So he went back in, got his trunks on, and got all his art stuff. But I never knew all that happened, and I never did ask why he would call me, and it was just crazy thing that happened. And the other thing is, I heard about, he wrote about his trips. I didn't realize he gave away 90% of his paintings. I mean, on a trip to San Francisco when he was in one of these cycles. That was a surprise. We
Mm,
have a handful left,
mm,
but and I still have the original drawings that were in the World Fair, which is pretty neat.
yeah.
But yeah, other than that, I guess, and he was, like you said, he was so determined, and he read a lot. Like when he'd go into the bedroom, and in 2 hours he had taken 12 art books. And I
Mm.
said, "Dad, what are you gonna do?" He said, "I read them all." So I mean, he was a
Wow.
speed reader,
Yeah.
and so that was a big surprise.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting your experience growing up and having to take care of him and then taking care of your sister. And now, looking back after years of experience, what what do you find right now? What do you feel most grateful for right now?
Right now, I just feel grateful that I was able to live in the age that I am. I'm in my late
Mm,
60s, and I'm grateful for my four sons. God gave me four sons, and
mm,
they're all. I never really demanded anything of them. I know I was asked by my mom to be a dentist. It didn't happen, but I've been in chemical sales for years. And I've been very successful. I'm when I was for Merck, I was the #1 award-winning salesman across the country.
mm,
And I guess I'm thankful and it's weird. I look back and I really learned from all this
mm,
that, life is short. And
mm,
I kind of follow what Ogmedino says, you're only here that long. So
mm,
now it's time to give back. And I'm thankful that I'm healthy, and I just have a good attitude, and I'm thankful for everything around me. I'm the only sibling left. I lost my other three brothers, and so in my
mm,
family. I'm the one. So I want to share my story. Whatever money it makes, if it makes a movie, I want to help the homeless, the
mm,
mentally ill out there. That's my goal. That would be, and I want to write my story. I want to write my sister's, because I got
mhm.
all her scrapbooks, and she wrote like my dad, which is interesting.
Oh, wow.
All her notes and everything, and all the experiences she had. So
Mm,
I think that's one of the most things I'm grateful for.
yeah.
I mean, there's a few things, but
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
absolutely. So, is there anything on your bucket list that you want to be able to accomplish other than writing these books?
Yeah, on my bucket list, I really want to make this a movie someday. I want it
Mm,
to make it a movie, and like I said, and be able to give back from what I make from the movie. And I've traveled and I've done a lot of things, but I just love life, and I love what I do. And I miss my mom, especially, I mean, I was so
yeah.
close to her,
Mm,
and I'm just thankful for what I have.
mm.
And as far as the bucket list, what's interesting, I'm trying to think what my bucket list is, because I did write it just recently,
Oh,
and I
really?
got
Oh,
about
wow.
25 things on there that I
Oh, my
wrote.
goodness.
And I always do every year. I learned it from Zig Ziglar, or I
Mm,
put the top 10 things and I post them by my desk. And it's
okay.
interesting. Every year I do that, I, I, I get nine out of 10. Let's put it that way. That's pretty good.
That is pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is a powerful tool. I know I did that one time. I was at some sort of workshop, and someone had us write down, and I think I just picked like three things, and then I kind of forgot about it. And then I was going through my papers and came up with it like a year later, and I went, oh, I did those. I did that. I did that. So
Yeah,
it's important to write stuff down. It really
it
does.
is.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is when I went to work for Merck, when I was with their Calgon division, first regional meeting I went to, the manager said, put on your desk, you will be the best. You're number one.
Mm.
I did that in the second year. I was number one in this whole company I'd never been a part of. And it's like, and I still have that number one thing on my desk. And I look at it. It's a psychological thing. It's, like everybody says, like when you make calls, I know one of the motivational guys says, always before you look in the mirror and you say, I'm going to be my best.
Mm.
I'm the best. And and that's, I believe in that.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I'm sure
absolutely.
a lot of sports guys do too, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, it really does. Your brain. I've done a lot of reading even on the biology of the brain and how the brain works, and it's true. It's like your brain takes that information in, whatever you feed it. So you really do need to make sure that you feed it exactly what you want, so that it can come
Exactly.
about.
Yeah, I never forget. I got my degree in chemistry and I took sensory physiology, and that was the
Mm,
brain at UC Irvine.
yeah.
And
Okay.
I'm in water chemistry right now, and it's so much like our body and our brain.
Mm,
I mean, it's like pH and everything, balance in our body. It's amazing,
mm,
how chemistry and water and, like you said, the
yeah.
brain chemistry. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to ask you one last thing, and actually, I may ask you two. Number one would be, what's one thing that most people don't know about you?
One thing that most people don't know about me, I'm a magician. One of my hobbies is I'm a magician at the
Ah,
Hollywood Magic Castle.
oh,
And
wow.
it's kind of interesting. I've been a magician for 15 years. And, with this COVID thing, it's kind of like not much is going on for magicians, but it's interesting. My grandfather was a magician, and it always fascinated me with everybody, the coins and the cards. And so I took classes with Mark Wilson, who just recently passed, and he
Mm,
had Alakazam years ago and at the Magic Castle. And I learned about
mm.
15 years ago, and I have a magic partner that I work with. And yeah, not many people know that. And I just love it. It's just every week I'm there at the Magic Castle, but right now it's closed. It's number
Wow.
one magic house in the world. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
I have, and well, and especially because I also we watch Penn and Teller's show on
Oh,
television
yeah.
all the time, and they have a unique setup now because they've been able to, in this age of COVID, they're
uh,
bringing in, having videos from magicians all over the world showing their stuff,
right.
and then they've got this interesting video wall with audience members in like individual things. I don't know how they're doing it, but it's
Yeah.
very cool. So,
Yeah,
so
that's cool.
you could
Yeah.
still be on Penn and Teller's fool us. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
definitely could. Who knows? That's a man. Put that on my bucket list, number
There you,
26, right?
there you go. There you go. All right. Well, one last thing I'm going to ask you, and is that has there been one person in your life that has really made a difference, and if so, how?
Well, I think one person in my life has really made a difference. I have a doctor friend of mine that's an acupuncturist, and
Mm,
basically she encouraged me to write the book, and
mm,
it finally did it. And I kept telling people this story. I mean, 20 years ago, I told it, or 30 years ago, I told a guy in a hospital this story when I was having a hernia surgery, and he was right next to me. He says, "Man, why don't you write a book?" And so, and then it came up again, and I said, I'm going to do it. So I actually have a cabin in the mountains that I go to, and I isolate myself, and it's called Trita's Birdhouse after my
mm,
mom. She helped me design it. She went up there one time, let's make a cabin like a birdhouse. And that's
mm.
where I get my inspiration. And I go up there on my own. And yeah, I really credit her. I mean, she encouraged me and she said, do it. And I did it. It's not easy to write a book. And it's
That's
really
true.
fortunate I got done. It took me 5 or 6 years. And I asked my oldest son, who's a TV producer, director for reality, Flea Market Flip was his big show where he won his Emmy. And I said,
Mm,
Vince, will you edit this? And
mhm.
it took him a year to edit it. It took me 5 years to write. So there's a lot in the book. And I think anybody that looks at it on Kindle, on a hard copy, they're gonna love it because
Mm,
I cried, I laughed when I wrote the book, and it's like it's all me. I tried to put everything I could,
mm,
and it's interesting. Like you said, I discovered things I never knew. I relived the experience of putting my dad in the mental hospital. I mean,
mm,
it's really quite a story. And I
mm.
know I've listened to your podcast. I think it's an inspiration.
Oh, and,
It will
yeah,
be.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and as someone who just finished writing her first book, I can also relate on it took me 4 years to get it going, but actually really the last two to actually get it written and out there. So I'm uh
Well,
and it,
congratulations. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you write it. I used to write it when I wrote it and I'd throw the pieces away and I said, no, it's not going to work. And I'd
Yeah.
rewrite it,
Yeah.
and then and then finally you find out when you finish the book, it's like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
And then I,
I know.
because
Yeah.
I probably could have wrote 1,000 pages, but this
Hmm.
is an easy read, 114 pages.
Oh,
But I figured I told a story.
yeah.
Now people want to, I'll try to put more and more on my blog and my website and my next book. I mean,
Yeah.
I want to share all this because a lot of people never experience or see what I'm talking about. And
Hmm.
it's kind of like a deeper, they're going to see it a little deeper. What's it all about?
No, absolutely.
And,
And
and
I
you
love,
could,
oh,
huh?
sorry. I was just going to say, I love biographies anyway. So it's always fascinating to read.
It is.
Hear
And
people.
you can, if you go through a lot of traumatic things in your life, you
Hmm.
can still come out okay. I mean, I've had
Absolutely.
friends when I was in high school, they went the other direction. They had a lot of turmoil at home. I couldn't,
Mm.
I mean, I was offered all that bad stuff, but I realized that, hey, I want to be somebody. And I did well, financially I'm fine. I'm sure it's time to give back. And that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Well, if someone wants to be able to, get a copy of the book or just even to learn more about you and your dad, where's the best place for people to find out?
Okay, I do have a website, www.david, DAVID, DORAZI.com. I have a blog. I'm on Facebook, and they could get it's on Kindle form, it's on digital form, it's on hard copy,
Mm.
and you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or ask for it at any of your local bookstores because they buy it from Ingram and indie books, and they could order it for you if they don't have
Awesome.
it in stock. So,
Okay. Awesome. Well, I
all
will make
right.
sure I'll make sure to have all that information in the show notes as well.
Okay. All right.
But I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your story and your dad's story. And
Thank
I
you.
know that it was definitely inspiring hearing all about the different things he's gone through and what you went through as well.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show, and best of luck and happy new year, and be safe and healthy. And hopefully 2021 will be a great year, and good luck on your new book.
Thank you. Absolutely. I
Yeah.
know it will be.
Yeah.
And
And I definitely will pick it up.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's available on Amazon as well. So,
All right. Very good.
um, oh yes. Well, I wanted to just say thank you out
Okay.
there who are
You're welcome.
watching and listening. Thank you for being subscribers and viewers, and we appreciate you so much. And just as always, I encourage you to now go out there and live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically.